Well, hey, Judd, thank you so much for taking a moment out of your busy schedule to talk about Hunger Ward, our little film. It means a lot that you can just take a moment to share your thoughts about it. Um, you know, I was floored when you said you'd seen Hunger Ward, because you're kind of known for comedy as much as anything else. Although I wouldn't call The King of Staten Island necessarily comedy. I think it's a beautiful film that
Thank
moves through so many different areas, But thank you for your interest in doc film, especially human rights film. Can you just sort of share how you found the film and your reaction to it?
Well, Sheila Nevins, who you work with, who runs MTV documentaries, worked at HBO for a long time, and she was the person that allowed me to set up the Avett Brothers documentary that I made called May It Last, and also the Gary Shandling documentary, the Zen Diaries of Gary Shandling. So I've known her for a very long time. And I've always admired her work. And every once in a while, I bug people and I say, "What should I have watched?" Uh, I'm big on getting links to things and pushing people for links. And so there's a group of people that I bug all the time. A lot of the great documentarians, like Joe Berlinger and Alex Gibney, I just randomly will go, "What are you working on? Can I see where you're at?" Just because I really enjoy documentaries, and I probably enjoy them more than anything right now. I mean, it's really a golden era, and I feel like I'm personally benefiting.
Where do you think that interest comes from? I mean, I know you've worked in nonfiction, obviously, like you said, but I mean, I think that's great that someone who has had such a varied career in so many roles, that you sort of still do hew towards nonfiction a lot. What, what's the catalyst for that, you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that I just find people interesting, you know, all aspects. I'm interested in documentaries about creative people and fascinating people, and I'm always interested in the ways we treat each other well and the way we treat each other badly, human nature.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm endlessly fascinated by how we all behave on this earth. And I really took your documentary is very, very powerful, and certain documentaries really make you go to a place that most people want to avoid. And there's a lot of conflict in the world, and it's tragic and heartbreaking. And I think to be a good person at this moment in history, you have to look some things in the eye, so you could find a way to do something positive. Maybe it's in your community, maybe it's helping those people who are suffering. So I really appreciated that you made the documentary, because I think that the work that goes into something like that is unspeakably difficult. It's just a difficult subject to face and to live in it like that, and to make that commitment to show the world something that needs to be seen in order to make a change which saves lives. There's nothing more important than that.
Do you remember how did Sheila pitch it to you? I'm just curious. And then, I mean, when you watched the film, what were you left with at the end?
Sheila doesn't have to pitch me in great detail. Uh,
Yeah.
she said, this is a documentary that is difficult, but needs a lot of love and support, and it's important that people see it, because the result of people seeing it will be saving lives. And that's how I felt when I saw it. I think in life sometimes it's easy to turn away from pain,
Yeah.
and most of the time that is what we do. I think on some level people think the only way I can survive as a person is to turn away from pain and suffering. But when we don't, uh, it brings out the best in us. It certainly takes uh, a moment, a breath, some strength to say, I'm going to face something. But I always, feel good after I do. But it's not a normal type of good feeling. It's it's like having gotten through something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And feeling like that was as tough as it gets to face that. But it was really important that I did, and I'm glad that I did, because I know I can now do something that will have a large effect on other people. It's impossible to watch your documentary and not want to get on the phone, get on the internet, make a contribution, write a letter, post about it. And there's so many conflicts in the world, and a lot of times people don't know what they're about. They don't know who to speak up to. It actually requires a little research to go, what is happening in that part of the world? What can I do? What organization can I support? So that was my reaction to it. Was the second it was over, I just went online and tried to learn a little bit more about it and try to find out who I could support, what charities were helping, because there was no way to go to sleep without getting involved immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great, because that was part of what we were trying to achieve with the film, was that people would open the Google panel at the end, right, and just start typing away, right? Which is sort of why that we shaped the film the way we did, right? I thought of it as a series of questions that we wanted to pose at each step in the narrative, which we had no intent to fully contextualize or answer, whether didactically or not. I really, as a director, just wanted to pose question after question after question, so people got to the end and asked why, right? How can this be? How can this be that, a 6-year-old girl weighs 15 pounds when our world has all the food we need in it, right? And yet we haven't had the will as a global community to solve it, right? So I'm heartened to hear that you got to the Google panel piece at the end, because that was what I was hoping to do, in part at least, So
absolutely. And I don't think we've explained what the movie is about. I would assume some people know who are watching this and some people don't know, but do you want to briefly explain?
Yeah. So Hunger Ward really is a very narrow view on the effects of the war in Yemen, particularly on civilians. And it takes place in two TFCs, therapeutic feeding centers, one in the south of the country in Aden, and then one in Aslam in the north, which is held by the Houthi rebel group. And it's very much a film that I decided that I wanted to tell really from the point of view of the impacts on civilians in particular, right? Because I could have gone and done, a frontline piece, where we're on the front lines of the film, but I really was more interested in sort of some of the insidious tools that were being used in this particular conflict that we don't always see, and in particular the tool of starvation in war, which is just absolutely horrific on its face and also in practice. I don't know if you know this, but a couple of years ago, the United Nations actually passed a resolution because of the conflict in Yemen, sort of restating and reiterating that starvation as a tool in war is a war crime, because the blockade was starting to be put into place over Yemen, both sea and air at that point, to prevent foodstuffs and medicine from entering the country. And to me, just as a human being, as a filmmaker, as a dad, I'm just disgusted by that, horrified by that. And I think we'll look back on this moment 10 years from now, 50 years from now, as a global community, and be ashamed. And we ought to be, So I took this very narrow view sort of on the war through those who are most vulnerable, children who are starving right now because of the horrible blockade that's in place. So that was kind of the approach to the whole thing that we took with it.
And what is your hope of what people will do when they see it, and how it can affect what our country does politically to end a conflict like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was looking at some of my old notes for the film this morning before we came on, and I bumped across this quote that I'd scribbled down by Bertolt Brecht, who wrote, the art is not a mirror that we hold up to reality, but a hammer with which we shape it. And I had that quote sort of on my computer before we flew to Yemen. And I think it encapsulates what we're trying to do with the film, right? As a vehicle for change, because, I think cinema is one of those mediums that you really can move people in a particular way. And motivate them to take action. And so that's what we're doing with the film. We've been doing a series of civil society screenings with policymakers, with civil society groups to apply pressure, particularly on the Biden administration and on senators and representatives to end the blockade over the country. Because it's really just throttling access to food through inflation and lack of diesel and foodstuffs. That can be ended. So we're really urging people to take action, particularly with U.S. representatives, because it is really our government that is supporting Saudi Arabia to this day in the blockade. So that's the work we've been doing.
And what is the Biden administration's position on all of this?
Well, we're hopeful. Biden's first sort of public stance on it a couple weeks into the administration was that the U.S. would end all offensive operations or support of offensive operations, which is a good start, right? Because it's sort of the opposite of what the Trump administration was doing. It's yet to be fully clarified exactly what that means. And we still haven't fully applied the full pressure of the U.S. government to provide cover for Saudi Arabia, frankly, who is the primary driver of the blockade. So it's been a hopeful start, but far more needs to be done, particularly in ending the blockade.
And what is the root cause of the conflict itself?
There are so many causes of this conflict. It's incredibly complicated from a geopolitical standpoint. But the shorthand for that would be it's usually discussed as a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. That's not entirely accurate. The Houthis, who hold the north, really are their own entity. And they've only opened up to Iran more, frankly, because of Saudi Arabia's intervention. So it really started as a civil war when the Houthis took over the north, but it escalated rapidly when Saudi Arabia intervened and started a bombing campaign over the country in early 2015. And it's just gotten worse since then. If you remember, there's the scene in the middle of the film where we sort of show this distillation of the effects of a single missile attack that happened in the country, because it's been a constant barrage of attacks on, to a great extent, non-military targets for 6 years now. Yeah. So it's ugly, definitely ugly.
It reminded me of the scene in the Collective where they show the nightclub on fire, and it really does seem like so much has changed with documentaries, where a lot of these films show imagery that is so powerful but brutal as anything can be, in order to make these points about how people treat each other, or how what bad policy can lead to. Yeah. And how do you feel about that, about showing things on screen that force people to confront these issues in the starkest possible way?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, a constant tension, right? And I think both filming and then in post, it was one of the greatest tensions and creative questions that we were forced to examine on a daily basis. How much is too much, right? how graphic do how, when something is fundamentally graphic, you know, the passing of a child, or a moment immediately post missile strike, how do you engage the viewers so they don't turn away? How do you keep them engaged? And you do, and also walk that line between what is necessary and what is gratuitous, right? And that was something I was really intentional about and very careful about throughout. And, you know, oftentimes the answer to that question would come from those I was collaborating with. So if you recall at the very beginning of the film, there's this young infant, Asila, who passes away, who from starvation-related causes. And, you know, we have footage that is incredibly graphic from the attempts to revive her in the ICU that we didn't include, because I thought if we included that, audiences wouldn't stick with us. They would turn away, and we would lose that opportunity to show what it's like for a mother to grieve over the loss of a child when she doesn't need to. And so, but when we talked with the family, they were absolutely adamant that we continue filming even as this was unfolding. But also they really made it clear that if there was anything I could do as a director to include the passing of their child in the film, that they absolutely wanted me to include it, which surprised me a little bit, right? And yet they felt so strongly that they wanted people to know, they wanted the rest of the world to know that their child had passed because of this blockade, because they didn't have access to the most fundamental thing, food for their child. And, you know, when that happened, I knew that I was going to do everything in my power as a director to make it work, right? I felt sort of compelled, and I felt a responsibility there to try to work in that moment.
Well, when, you know, I watched the film, you know, you have certain children that you spend time with, and you see in their faces just the you know, the beauty of childhood. You know,
Yeah.
you know, they're starving, and yet in their eyes, you know, I see my own kids,
Yeah.
and I see their beauty and their humor, and, you know, just their life force.
That's right.
And they seem the same as all the kids that I've met through my children, all their friends, exactly the same. Like in a moment, it was so universal, and also obviously so horrifying, because it's so easy to hear about people and numbers and to have it not mean anything, you know,
Yeah.
for the entire issue to be dehumanized.
Yeah.
And it reminded me a lot about the decisions made about how to deal with COVID in our
Yeah.
country, and how so many decisions were made to help get politicians reelected,
Yeah.
and that they wanted to do the same thing for us to think, oh, these numbers aren't so bad and these people become numbers. But what you did is you made them real.
Yeah. You know, the you know, you're right. And I think compassion fatigue about this conflict and other conflicts is a huge issue, right? And I really feel like if you can hone in on the singular, right, on Abir, the 6-year-old, and Omema, the 10-year-old, you're right. We can then sort of like experience them as children, which is what they are, which is the important thing, and find the universal in that. And that was the hope, certainly. And I think, you know, one of the moments that comes up a lot in discussion is Abir in the north of the country, the 6-year-old who, you know, is stricken with starvation, chronic starvation, and Makia, the nurse, continuously tries to get her to smile, and she can't for a long time, right? And to me, when I saw that play out over and over again while in that clinic watching, it just tore me apart as a dad, right? Because here's this 6-year-old, and she can't even bring herself to smile because she's so weak, and her senses have been so deadened by the chronic effects of hunger. And you know, I wish we didn't live in that world, Judd. You know, I wish we lived in a world where every child was thriving And our hope with this is that we can sort of nudge civil society and nation states in the right direction to at least in this current dynamic in Yemen, at least.
And this is the third of a trilogy of documentaries that you've made. Can you
Yeah.
discuss what that trilogy is and how people could watch the other two?
Yeah. So this is a part, the third film of a humanitarian trilogy that I've been doing, that started loosely as this notion I would be covering displacement catalyzed by war in different parts of the world. So the first one was filmed on the border between Turkey and Syria. The second one was Lifeboat, covering asylum seekers crossing the Mediterranean. And then this one, of course, in Yemen. And each one of these, in an interesting way, I mean, you're a dad. Have you ever seen that book, A Beautiful Oops? Do you know that book?
Mm-mm.
Oh, it's a great children's book that it just takes this idea that, art and all things in art, you make mistakes, right? That we make mistakes in life, whether you're doing art or a film or writing a book, but then you embrace those, right? And that you make the coffee stain on the page and you transform that into a beautiful puddle instead, right? I carry that idea with me as a documentarian a lot because I have to. And I think each one of these films, we are faced with challenges on a daily basis that, at first they seem, what do you do when you go to film with a doctor, a pediatric specialist, and then a child dies in front of you within 2 hours, right? That's not something we wanted to film. And yet you have to find a way to pivot and to transform and to find some way to fold that in, because it's necessary and it ought to be there. So that was our approach with it. And certainly Hunger Ward, we pivoted like that every day in the field, and we're very proud of the trilogy. And it just launched on Paramount Plus on Friday. So it's now available on Paramount Plus and Pluto TV.
And what about the other two films?
Lifeboat is on the New Yorker, so you can just Google New Yorker Lifeboat and it's there. And then 50 Feet from Syria is on iTunes. You can find that on iTunes right now.
And tell me about your life and your work. Who pays for these types of films to be made? What else are you doing to personally survive? This is definitely humanitarian work, and it doesn't seem like it's commerce. So what is the life like of a documentarian making these kinds of films?
Yeah, so for the first two, I mean, I don't know what your craft service budget is on your current project, but for the first two films, I paid for them on credit cards. I literally, because there were fast moving, unfolding events, right? It was a doctor going to volunteer as an orthopedic surgeon as literally refugees flowed across the border. And then Lifeboat was a rescue mission to pull asylum seekers out of the sea before their rafts sank, frankly. So I didn't have time to go get a grant, right? Or to go to a funder. I felt like it was just vital that I get there quickly after I'd established the relationships to capture it. So, but then both of those, were picked up by distributors and we made into the black eventually. So I was happy so we turned that around. And then for Hunger Ward, I was really fortunate to have a couple early funders. We had Riot Films out of LA, and then Vulcan Productions, Paul Allen's company out of Seattle, came on board to put up the production budget. And then MTV Documentary Films, of course, came in and bought it, which we are just forever thankful for, because it now gives us such a larger viewership and a larger stage to push it out into the world.
And how do you decide what to do next after doing a trilogy like this?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do next, because I'd always set out to do this trilogy, which was, 6 years in the making. So, maybe I'll go do a film about puppy dogs or something. I don't know. I'm kind of interested in doing a music doc someday. I've never done one, and so that's kind of one of those things on my bucket list. So I might pick up one of those. How about you?
Well, I made a music documentary, with Michael Bonfiglio about the Avett brothers, and how we started that was Rick Rubin said to us, you should do something with the Avett brothers. Your life is better when you're around them. And for some reason, I took that very seriously.
Yeah.
And we just started shooting them, having no idea what it would be, if anyone would ever want it. And I just, you know, started self-funding it,
Yeah.
hoping something would come together. And it took a few years before we figured out what we were shooting.
Yeah.
I would recommend picking similarly nice people
Yeah.
to follow around. I really feel like, we all see so much content and so much passes through us so quickly, and you don't even remember having seen it.
Yeah.
And I feel like I will never forget your documentary. I mean, there were so many moments that are just so indelible, that change you just having watched them. And what's interesting is, as difficult as it was to watch, I do have this bubbling up sense that I want to watch it again.
Oh, interesting.
I want to experience it, knowing what's coming, and to feel it deeply, because I think in a movie like that, you're just scared the whole time. You care about everybody, you hope everyone's okay.
Yeah.
And I think seeing it again, there would be so much more to pick up on. Who were the people that who are the people that you admire, the documentarians that inspired you in your work?
Oh boy, there's just so many. I kind of pull from all quarters on that question. I think I just enjoy so many different kinds, but I think of I'm thinking of titles off the top of my head. I'm thinking of A Woman Captured, which is this Hungarian doc that was at Sundance a couple years ago. That's this pure verite piece. It's a single woman with a long lens, a zoom lens, who just covers this modern day story of slavery in Hungary. It's just really powerful verite filmmaking. I'm a big fan of Aquarella by Kosakowski, who just did Gunda as well, which I find his work just incredibly powerful.
I do not know these, but now I will have
Yeah,
to email you afterwards for the proper
yeah,
spelling and places to find them.
that's right. And then there's a film I love a lot called A Taste of Cement, which was shot entirely in a skyscraper in Lebanon, and it covers it sort of, it's an embed with a bunch of Syrian refugees, construction workers, who are basically quarantined within the structure as they build the skyscraper up. And the filmmakers do this really beautiful job of sort of interweaving their memories of the war in Syria with their experience of building the skyscraper. It sounds counterintuitive, but it completely works. It's just brilliant, brilliant work. So there's so many good ones out there, right?
Yeah, I'm working on a documentary right now with Michael Bonfiglio and our editor Joe Beshenkowski about George Carlin
Mm-hmm.
and his life and his comedic point of view. And as we are watching all of his work, which really challenges government, and it's about a lot of what's happening in our culture right now. It's pretty shocking how far ahead of the curve he was in questioning
Yeah.
so much what happens in our public life and how we communicate.
Yeah. Do you think you're going to do a lot more nonfiction work, or do you think you're going to sort of stay in the larger production world of fiction?
Well, I think I will do more documentaries. I actually enjoy doing them simultaneously, but it would be fun to go deeper. The last one I made, the Zen Diaries of Gary Shandling, in a lot of ways was an expression of grief and not knowing what to do with that loss, and all I could think to do, or my feeling was, I need to go fully forward into it and try to understand who this person was who was so important in my life. So I look back on it almost like a fever dream. Like, it feels weird that I even made it.
Yeah.
This 4.5-hour documentary about my friend's life, but in a way there was no way not to do it. But it's hard to find subject matter that propels me to put that type of effort in, because the work is very difficult, and I'm always I always have my eyes open for something that I want to talk about and think about all the time and care about, because I can't really do any of the work unless I care very
Yeah.
deeply. It has to be something that is so important that I feel like, oh, this has to be explored. And also, I need to explore it. I don't think anyone else will explore it like me.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
someone else can do as good a job as me, or will dig deeper than me. Then I don't need to make it. So I'm always looking for the thing that I think I understand more than someone else.
Yeah. And
Which is
it's such
very little. It's very little that I think that about.
Yeah, I always say that I'm kind of an expert on a couple things, whatever I've done films on, but nothing else. I'm kind of an idiot in other
Yeah.
realms of life. But if you ask me something about the conflict in Yemen right now, I can speak to that, right? But I think you're right. It's like you have to, if you're going to say yes to something, you got to say yes 110%, right? You have to say yes with your whole creative self, and that's a big ask, right? And so you have to really want it. You have to really care about it really deeply. And I think that's why I couldn't answer your question about what's next, because I don't think the next thing has come to me yet, has called my name. But I'll know when it happens for sure.
Yeah. I think that a lot of times with movies, both documentaries and scripted, TV shows and movies, I think I'm usually making it because it's something that I want to understand or understand about myself, that on some level I feel the need to dive deep and confront something or
Yeah.
learn something, and that these things are a reminder or a lesson that I feel like I need to learn.
Yeah.
And so thinking about how my friend, his life made me think about how I want to live my life, both what he did right and what I think he had trouble with. And the same for the Avett brothers, just watching how they are creatively, how they are as brothers, how they move through the world.
Yeah.
My interest in being around it is because I feel like I need to learn something. Something's not going the way it should be, or I have a lesson that I must learn to evolve in some way.
But yeah, and that'll inform your work on the next project, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
that'll make you a fuller human being, and it'll inform the decisions you make as a producer or director on the next one. I'm a big believer in that. If we haven't learned something from every mistake we've made or every project we've taken on, we're not doing it right. It's like you should be making mistakes and trying to get better each time.
I felt like when I was directing The King of Staten Island, I did a better job because I made the movie about Gary Shandling, that it forced me to move closer to the truth.
Yeah.
And I somehow learned how to tell a story in a new way by making that documentary, and in ways I still don't quite understand. Some of those skills transferred over to collaborating with Pete Davidson about his life and trying to come up with something fictional that would capture the spirit of what he has gone through.
Yeah. Well, and it's a beautiful rendition. I really thought it was a powerful, poignant film that really moved me deeply. It's really it's a beautiful piece. So kudos that I actually have a Postit. I've told the story sometimes where after I did 50 Feet from Syria, I just made a list of the things that I thought I could do better the next time, and I just put it on my primary computer monitor at my home office, and then after I finished Lifeboat, I did the same thing, right? I took that list down and I made another list of like the 5 things that I thought I could have done much better. And then I put that up there. So if each film, that's sort of my modus operandi, right? It's like, what have I learned and how could I sort of, integrate, incremental evolution into my process each time so I can become a little bit better of a filmmaker each time,
Absolutely. And I think that's a hard thing to do. Every once in a while I'll read a review that's not great or bad, and I'll go, okay, just sit and try to deal with the fact that maybe some of this is correct. And if it is correct, what is correct about it?
Yeah. I've read some of that. You read a lot of reviews, right? Like you read everything?
No, I don't. Not too many.
You don't? Okay.
I used to, but now I'll say to someone that I work with, just show me 3 good ones and I'll pretend they were all like these. And then slowly I'll stumble upon a bad one or two late at night
Yeah, right.
And there are certain people that I am interested in what their opinions were. And every once in a while, someone who's liked my work suddenly won't like something.
Yeah,
I'll be interested to figure out, how did I lose them?
yeah, yeah,
What are they saying? And maybe I can apply it. Although some reviews have pushed me on to the next level. I've had reviews where someone said, "You're on the right path. Keep going." And that was very meaningful to me, to have someone that I respected say, "I like this movie, but I think you can go farther."
yeah, yeah.
And that's something that inspired me to take chances at different stages in
Yeah.
my career.
Well, hey, listen, I have one more question for you, and again, thanks for your generosity of time here. So one of the things I've struggled with as a director with this film, with Hunger Ward, is whether I should, and if I do, sort of like tell viewers beforehand, especially colleagues, anything about it beforehand, right? And so every once in a while in an email, I'll write, find a quiet place, I think is what I said once, or something along those lines, because it's as you've noticed, a particular kind of film that is hard to watch. What would you recommend? Is that something I should do, or do you think, or if I do it, what should I say?
I felt like it was implied in the material.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I heard about the documentary, I felt like it would be challenging emotionally to watch. And so I don't know, if it requires people knowing what they're about to see. I didn't know, that it would be very honest, in showing the passing of a child, in the movie. And I don't know if I even can look back and say, would you have watched it
Mm-hmm.
if you knew?
Mm-hmm.
I'm very glad that I did.
Yeah.
I think it was important. I always think about this lesson Ram Dass gave. He was talking about somebody, he was talking about this woman, and he said that she would walk past this homeless person every day and never look at them. And he said, why don't you look at this person? And she says, because if I did, I'd have to let him live in my house. And I thought about that when I watched your film, which is, this is making that connection with that homeless person, and now you have to let them live in your house,
Right.
which you should. Which is obviously is just a metaphor for, you have to help people.
Yeah.
And what I've taken from this last pandemic year is, we don't get through these things without being there for each other.
Yeah.
It's very easy to not think about nurses and first responders. It's very easy to not think about the people who've suffered this year, to want to put it behind us.
Yeah.
And to get back to life and jump back to life. And that's what the country's confronting right now, which is, you still want me to sacrifice? You still want me to not have everything I want to have every second of the day to save maybe strangers? And the truth is, yes, we do need to continue to do that. And I think that's why seeing a film like this is so important, because there are forces in the world that want us to be in a fog. There are forces in the world that want us to be confused. There are forces in the world that don't want us to lift each other up.
That's right.
They lose something if the world joins together to love each other and care about each other. So I think you could just tell people it's tough stuff, but worth it.
Yeah.
And that will be the truth, unless you know a friend who needs to hear the details. I have somebody who needs to hear the details. But
yeah, that sounds like good advice.
Mhm.
Sounds like good advice. Judd, I know you're in production right now, and you're doing this after sort of wrapping for the day. So Man, just thank you. Just a big thank you for watching the film and for engaging with us on this. It's something that it means a lot to us as a small little production team with a human rights film to have someone of your stature watch it and care. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you making the film, and I appreciate all the people out there who are doing similar work. I think it's really important to the world, and I hope you make a lot more.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Take
All right,
care.
all right.
Bye
Take care. Be well.
bye.